I want to talk to you about the metric system. It's really worth making sure you get your head completely around this. Basically, until the 1700s, France and the world over used lots and lots of different measurements. Now, in England, we use the imperial system, and the imperial system, which means king or queen, was actually based on the body length and the length of body parts of the ruler at that time. So, for instance, with every new king or queen, all of our measurements got changed. The French thought this was completely mad. And so in the 1700s, they decided to base a new system, which we now call metric, on something that doesn't ever change. So they decided to calculate the metric system based on the length of the world. So what they did is they took the world and they calculated through trigonometry the distance between the equator and the North Pole, because that is a set length. Then they took this length and divided it into 10 million. And they called this 1 metre. Then they took platinum and cast this exact length in platinum, and it's kept safe. The reason they chose platinum was so that heat and pressure wouldn't affect it, so that this 1 metre would always stay exactly the same length as it was when it was first created. Now that they had a metre, they could measure lots of things and it would be really accurate. But they needed a way of labelling whether they had more than one or less than one. So they designed a system using prefixes, and a prefix is something that goes in front of a word that slightly changes its meaning. So they decided that they would call the metre a standard unit. Oops, pen's dying. Standard unit. Okay. Now, if they had more than one, they would describe it in Greek. So they decided to work in tens. So if you have 10 metres, you call it a decametre. And if you have 100 metres, you call it a hectometre. And the one that you'll probably recognise, if you have 1,000, you'll call this a kilometre. Notice that when I write metre, it isn't ER. That's because it's French, and that's how they write ER. So RE is the way you should write it. Kilo in ancient Greek means 100, 1,000. Hecto means 100, and deca means 10. Then what they decided to do is if they had less than a metre, so if they cut the metre up into smaller pieces, they would use deci, they'd use Latin, which is based on the Roman language. So deci means 1/10, so you're dividing by 10. If your next one would be centi, which is dividing by 100. So if you took your metre and divided it into 100, 1 centimetre would be one of those chunks. And then milli, which means 1,000. Now how you can remember these is a decade is 10 years, a century is 100 years, and a millennium is going to be 1,000 years. So for instance, if I was changing say for instance I had 7 hectometres and I wanted it in decametres, I know that there's a difference of 10 between them, of a power of 10. And because if I'm going from 7 hectometres down to decametres, I'm expecting, because decametres are smaller, I'm expecting there to be 10 times more because there's a factor of 10 between them. I'm going to go through that more clearly later.